Hey guys, just a quick disclaimer before we begin. This episode contains content that some listeners may find disturbing, so maybe don't listen with children around. Okay, now that's out of the way, on with the show. Hello Internet, and welcome to Ramblings of a Madman. I'm Alex, and I'm joined by Sean and Stuart for a shallow and probably uninformed dive into unexplained mysteries, conspiracy theories, and the supernatural. We're back for part 2 of Jack the Ripper. It's going to get good. We're going to dive into the suspects, and hopefully do some theory crafting. Sean's told me he's done a bit more research into serial killers, so I'm expecting some top-level knowledge. And Stu's here as always.
As always.
Mostly to laugh.
Yeah.
Can't get rid of it.
That's what you're paying for.
Yep. It's a hefty fee.
So, before we dive into it, do you want to do a bit of a recap from what was discussed in part 1? So we kind of did a timeline of events sort of thing, where we ran through a list of the 5 canonical victims put forth by ripperologists in the Whitechapel murder investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you remember them off the top of your heads?
I can when I look at my cheat sheet.
I can remember what happened. I can't remember their names. They seem to progressively get more gruesome as each one went on. They were all during the time of 1888.
Yes.
If that's correct.
It was over a couple of months in 1888.
Yeah, so they got progressively worse. All of them were sex workers, prostitutes, or working women in some way. They all involved alcohol. I think we discussed, we don't know 100% sure if the third one had alcohol.
Yeah, but the other 4 definitely did.
Yeah, the first one started off with just like 2 cuts to the neck, and her abdomen was mutilated in some way. And then it progressed quite drastically to the 5th, where she was gruesomely butchered, basically, and body parts were just cut off and left in almost ritualistic positions. So you can see the progression of the killer.
Yeah, it was horrible.
Presuming that it is one person doing this, obviously.
Mm-hmm. There was also the double event as well, between 3 and 4.
Yeah, so
which happened on the same night.
Yeah, so that's it's presumed, I guess, by ripperologists that it was the same killer. But obviously we can discuss that later.
Cool. So, in the second part of this, we're going to be talking about all the suspects. Well, not all the suspects. I picked out 6 suspects, which I think are particularly interesting, or the most likely, in my opinion. But these are 6 of literally hundreds of suspects in this case. And
yeah, I've seen the list.
The list only gets bigger over time. It seems that it's hard to take people off the list and a lot easier to add people to it. Because with a lot of the suspects, there isn't much hard evidence. It all tends to be lots of crazy theories, which are kind of plausible, but often there isn't hard evidence behind them.
Yeah.
For example, like, one of the famous suspects in the case is a royal guy, nicknamed Eddie, and there's a whole theory about a royal conspiracy where he was the murderer and they covered it all up.
Oh, okay.
Which is possible. Which
is possible, yeah. But I've left it out because there's logs saying that he wasn't in the country around the times of the murders.
Okay. Yeah.
And again, they could be fabricated, but it's damning evidence, in my opinion, that...
Sure.
Yeah. And also, a part of that theory was that he had syphilis and he had insanity because of it, as Sean researched about at the end of the last episode. Mm-hmm. And there's no medical records at all saying he had syphilis, so that's the issue.
Seems unlikely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with these 6 suspects, Alex, are you going to try and convince us that it's one in particular? Is that what we're going for?
I don't think so, because I'm torn between a couple of them.
Okay.
There's definitely some which are more likely than others, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I think it's best if we go through the 6 and then kind of group decide at the end.
Okay, yeah.
Perhaps you can influence me a bit, or I can influence you.
It would be quite psychopathic of us if we tried to manipulate you into thinking something different.
Can I repeat it once again? Sean is 100% Jack the Ripper.
No. I've just done my research.
He has been to London.
He has been to London.
happened.
Damning evidence.
Damning evidence.
So I think to start with, I'll talk about the police investigation at the time, because there's a lot of issues with it. Mm-hmm. So the public wasn't very happy with the way the police carried out the investigation at the time, because they showed no results. The commissioner was constantly being slammed in the press. There was all these cartoons and panels and stuff about how the police are useless and the Ripper's completely free and stuff like that.
Mm.
But in my opinion, the police worked quite well with the very little evidence they had. There are plenty of crime scene sketches and photographs and interviews of both witnesses and suspects, and everything's compiled together in comprehensive reports. So, for example, there's all those maps that we looked at last time, and there's photographs of especially the Mary Kelly scene and stuff like that. And there was also blood splatter analysis done of the Mary Kelly scene. So I think they've done quite well.
Yeah, and we've got to remember this is a long time ago. Forensics will have moved on now, which is why we'll have extra theories. But back then, they were just dealing with simple, pure detective work, aren't they?
Yeah. I don't know if any of the evidence was actually kept, but I'm sure I saw something somewhere that... I definitely saw one documentary where obviously technology has advanced so much more in like the forensic science area. So they were planning on looking through different bits to see if they could actually solve the case, even though obviously it's over 100 years since.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they were planning on doing that in this documentary, which I have no reference for.
And they couldn't in the end because they didn't have the evidence stored. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know. Can't remember. At the time, I wasn't really interested.
Great anecdote.
And it would have been amazing if I was.
This is the world's worst transition.
I think it was. You can call that out. I think it was. They mentioned it because it was relevant. You know, the Jack the Ripper mystery, that was all relevant to the forensic science of it. It might have even been part of my degree, actually. Something we watched because of that. So, because forensic science has obviously advanced so much, they were planning on trying to do something with the knowledge that we have now.
Yeah. But because a lot of suspects are still coming out, it's likely to say that the evidence has been kept quite well, because they're obviously calling upon evidence which is hundreds of years old.
Well, so there's still actually...
There's still suspects coming out. Like, I'm going to talk about one which came up in the late 90s, which, I mean,
wow.
It's quite a while ago now, but that's a long time ago after the investigation was closed.
110 years or so, isn't it? After the original crimes.
And as I said in the first part, pretty much the only way to catch a criminal during this time was to either catch them in the act or get them to confess under questioning.
Yeah.
And obviously they couldn't do either during any of the 11 murders in the entire investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on, I want to kind of profile the killer off the top of our heads. So with all the evidence that we've gone through in the first part, paint me a lovely visual picture of what you think Jack the Ripper would look like, what job he had, where he would have lived. Or she. So what do you reckon? We'll start with male or female?
I think I want to say male.
Yeah, I lean towards male as well.
The reason I say male isn't because of anything other than they were all prostitutes. And I think the stereotype is that prostitutes would be more appealing to men than women at that time, just because of the way society would have been.
I was going to say women because of the opposite of that.
That's, fair argument.
What if there was just obviously you said it was a man because of that reason. I actually think it could be a woman for the opposite reasons, in regards to, you know, what if she's jealous, or what if she doesn't like the profession, you know, prostitution. So what if she had a vendetta or a grudge or whatever? It doesn't. I think both theories are completely valid. Also, as well, you know, without trying to sound sexist, I guess it's like, what if the women, or the victims? I don't know if it was mentioned anywhere that they were good looking.
Only one of them, wasn't it? The last victim was the young, attractive, like well-off girl, wasn't she? That we spoke about.
But there's photos of all the victims. I mean, they are corpses, but a lot of them didn't have facial damage, so you can see what they look like.
Except for the last one. Yes.
Except for the last one.
I know what you mean about it being a guy. I was thinking more along like the pattern, and like, you know, if it is a serial killer, they tend to have predatory behavior. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, the aggressive nature of the latter killings certainly would suggest more aggression, which would be kind of typically associated with male behavior as opposed to female.
And also, you know, potentially overpowering as well. Obviously, you know, a woman could still be able to overpower any of these women, but the likelihood is that, you know, a guy would have been more able to do it or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's more likely to be a man who is probably of a reasonable attraction, so would have easily been able to attract a prostitute without having, or has money, yeah. Who probably has some sort of medical or surgical background, given the progression of the anatomy in the killings.
Or a fascination in it.
Yeah.
But then again, during that time, I don't think a fascination would be able to get you the knowledge and the know-how of it, to be so surgical with it.
No,
yeah,
Wikipedia.
it's not like you could Google like a picture of the body.
Wikipedia wasn't quite at its forefront there.
No,
it wasn't. It wasn't quite at the level it is now.
Yeah.
It wasn't getting funding, yeah.
It needs those precious donations.
Still needs them. Donate to Wikipedia, it's very useful. But another thing I want to say on the issue of gender of Jack. Pretty much every female, citation needed, but from what I understand, pretty much every female serial killer that we got documented used poison or some sort of chemical substance to kill people.
Yeah.
And using a physical weapon like a knife and mutilating to this sort of level would generally be more of a male serial killer thing to do.
Yeah, you typically think of a female murderer being the subtle assassin style.
Yeah. Poison
or drugging of some kind. But I guess you could easily drug somebody and slit their throat. But we've got I don't remember there being any suggestion of a drug use, but there was certainly some level of alcohol intoxication, wasn't there?
Yeah. But poisons would come up in the autopsy, and there's no evidence of a poison or foreign substances in the body of any of the 5 victims.
Assuming that they would... I make the assumption that they would be able to recognise the clinical effects of most poisons that would have been available back in that time.
They would, because I know, there's a female serial killer at the time called the Angel of Death.
Okay.
And she killed, hundreds of people. It was ridiculous, because she was a nurse.
Okay.
Her, she was basically thinking, I'm putting them out of their misery. But in essence, she was just slowly killing them with various poisons.
She was Harold Shipmaning.
It was despicable. But, so she's painted basically the picture that everyone kind of thinks of with Jack the Ripper, like a rich guy with a surgical or a medical background. Do you agree, Sean?
It does kind of lean to it. If we look back at the letters, you can speak and read and write. You haven't heard him speak, but the English is fine. The handwriting's fine. It's quite. If you look at the handwriting as well, it's quite. You seem to like the handwriting analysis, and I'm not.
Yeah.
Good at analysing it, but you look at it, it's quite well written. Whereas
for the first two, it was. The third one was very
the
poor
hoaxy kind of one, isn't it?
Well,
I think it suggests an education, doesn't it?
It does.
I also think they're left-handed.
Yeah.
That's a personal theory of the podcast that we've come up with.
Yeah.
As a fellow left-hander and potential Jack the Ripper serial killer.
Yeah.
Apparently.
I love how you say potential, but we all know what you mean.
No, it does make sense. But with the time, I don't know what education and stuff would have been like. So I'm presuming around that time, it still would have been the case of if you're quite wealthy, quite well off, you probably had a good education, you learn how to read and write properly.
Yeah, I would agree.
I don't think the lower class people had education at that time. A lot of them probably couldn't read and write. So
I don't know what year. Obviously, there's no cut-off point as such, but what time period did it start turning around in that respect?
Probably after World War One, I'd think.
You reckon? Maybe earlier?
Perhaps earlier. But
I think probably earlier. I would say probably by the end of Queen Victoria's reign, things were picking up educational-wise.
1901.
1901, yeah. Probably 20th century. As the 20th century turned, yeah.
So I kind of agree with that picture. That's the general idea. Whenever you see a picture of Jack the Ripper or a depiction of him or whatever, you just see a guy in a top hat with a suit or whatever.
The moustache.
And
Don't forget the moustache.
And a cane.
Yeah, that basically. So it's kind of...
Is this guy a pimp?
I mean, we are painting quite a pimpy picture, aren't we?
The cane.
He was shirtless with the fur coat on.
Yeah.
Scarred back of the hand.
Yeah.
Scarred back of the hand.
For shizzle.
Covered in prostitute corpses. Quite a dark pimp.
Quite a dark pimp, yeah. So you don't think he's white, timeline. Alex?
Well, I did say that there was a lot of immigration issues going on with the area.
That's true, actually. We're making the assumption that this chap is Caucasian, but I don't actually know.
A lot of the eyewitness testimony sort of stuff described him as Polish-looking, perhaps, or
okay,
Eastern European. Yeah.
That's an interesting.
Looking through the the suspects, just the pictures, they are all white actually.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of Irish influence in the area at the time and a lot of Eastern European influence. So that made up the majority of the population of Whitechapel during this time.
I wonder if
period.
people would have had more of a mistrust for foreigners still, even then.
Yeah, definitely. Well, don't forget as well, I don't know what time it was in the UK, but when did the slave trade end and stuff like that? So around about 1888, it would still be quite a racist time as well. So what I'm thinking, in that part of London, would there be foreigners?
I mean, there definitely would be, but if Jack the Ripper had a different skin colour, for example, he would have been a lot more, would have stood out a lot more, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because you can imagine any eyewitness testimony would have jumped on his...
The first thing would have been skin colour, yeah. So, what about location? Do you think he was local? Do you think he would commute in? On the train, maybe?
I mean, the whole idea of, don't shit where you sleep. Why would he do it where he lives?
Or if you're assuming he would commute in, that likely indicates a level of wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Because Whitechapel was quite a poor area, so if he was local to the area, he probably wasn't wealthy.
Yeah, but also, I remember looking at the local map, and there was a...
Yeah. It's the red bits, I know. There are some wealthy areas, but they were along the main streets.
Yeah, but there's still what it classes as upper class.
Yeah, but it was a very small percentage of the population of that area. That's the issue with it.
Yeah, true.
It would very much narrow down the suspects.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about the whole, did they travel in, did they not?
It's very much debated in the topic.
I do agree with that. It would be... You'd have much more chance of being recognised if you were local, wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Even just fleeing. I think generally people would remember somebody fleeing a scene of a crime that even was found later. Because, for example, if you see somebody kind of scurry away from somewhere, or you see someone running in the street, you're automatically a bit suspicious.
Yeah, definitely running.
If you then find out that a murder happened just around the corner from where you saw that person, your brain just goes, this doesn't seem right. I remember that person. And if you're a local, you've just got such a high chance of somebody being like, well, hang on a minute, that was Bob de Repair.
Paul, what a name.
Yeah.
That was off the top of your head.
Yeah.
Bob de Repair. So that's an impressive name right there.
Okay.
Yep. I reckon it was him.
It was Bob de Repair.
It was definitely Bob de Repair.
He's not on my list of 6, so you're on your own with that. Maybe
I'm on my own with that one.
But...
I was going to say, in terms of him transferring in and stuff, it kind of makes sense in my head that he would stick around. Like I mentioned in the last part, with the illusions of grandeur and stuff like that. The whole wanting to be noticed because he's trying to make a...
Yeah, that's a good point.
But also, my other argument to that, against it, would be he'd want to travel in... Well, actually, do we have any idea if Whitechapel was a more likely place to find a prostitute?
I'm not sure.
It kind of makes sense in my head that different areas of anywhere...
Yeah, I think a poorer area would have more sex trade.
I did give that stat in part 1. See if I can find it now. They estimated that there was 1,200 prostitutes in Whitechapel and about 62 brothels at the time.
So yeah, it's
That's
a bit like
lot.
going to Soho, isn't it?
Mm.
Following on from your point there, Sean, as well, we spoke a little bit about psychopathic tendencies last episode, didn't we? Where we said in part 1 about psychopaths having things like God complexes. Maybe it was the arrogance of not being able to be caught that meant that he was more likely to be local.
Yeah.
As well. Because that might be the flip side of it, which is it's arrogance, not fear of being caught. No one will see me do this. No one will be able to link any of this to me. He's so arrogant that he then sends letters to the police being like, well, you've still not caught me. It's whether or not there is just like a God complex.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of sounds like he wants to be caught a little bit.
Yeah. It's like a challenge. It's like throwing the gauntlet down to the police, isn't it?
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So what I've done is, well, I haven't done this, but I I took it from a documentary. What they did was they sort of aggregated eyewitness testimonies so they could get a general appearance of Jack the Ripper. And it very much seems how Stuart described him and how he's generically seen by people when they think of Jack the Ripper. So he's 25 to 35 years old. He's between 5'5" and 5'7", which I guess was sort of an average height back then for males.
Okay.
He was stocky in build with a fair complexion. He had a mustache. And he was seen wearing a dark overcoat and a dark hat. So pretty generic.
Yeah.
Like, describes most men in the late 1800s, from what I understand.
Yeah, he obviously... I know we've discussed the fact that he maybe wanted to attract attention to the killings. He still would have tried to hide his identity just by being as generic as possible, potentially.
Yeah.
Hiding in plain sight.
Exactly.
Yeah, where he lives.
Or doesn't live.
Or doesn't.
Okay, as I mentioned before about the debate on whether Jack the Ripper was local or whether he travelled in, there's some statements on either or. So in favour of the fact that Jack the Ripper lived locally, the concentration of murders geographically suggests that he lived locally, and the concentration of the murders around the weekends suggests he had regular employment throughout the week.
Yeah.
So they were pretty much Friday and Saturday, these
So he was
canonical
working man
killings.
as well.
It seems like, yeah.
Implies that he would have had a bit more money, I guess. I don't know. I don't know. Off some
You can make general statements like that. I think it's fair to say.
I don't know. In my head, I'm kind of getting, like, maybe depending on the jobs that the working class would have done at the time, like factory work and stuff, would that have been weekends? Would they have worked?
Yeah,
I
I was
so.
going to say that. Would it have still been 5-day working? Maybe it's 5-day working if you're rich, but if you're poor, you maybe only have your God's rest day on Sunday.
Yeah, that's what I think. And I think you try and get as many hours as you could out of it, because they weren't very well paying jobs. And there was probably a big staff turnover. Again, with the machine manualing that I mentioned in the first part.
Oh, yeah.
A little bit, yeah.
Just a bit. God, Victorian London sucked.
Yep.
So if we're basing suspects on the fact that Jack may have had scientific or anatomical knowledge, then it's unlikely that such an educated man would have lived in Whitechapel, and therefore would have ventured into the area to perform the murders before returning home.
Yeah. Okay.
Was there a doctor?
There were doctors living in Whitechapel, definitely. Because
it's just less likely.
The police called one to identify the first body, remember?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, there was a local one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe 2 local.
So you can go on the fact that he had anatomical knowledge, but it's not a stretch to say that butchers would have had sufficient anatomical knowledge to carry out the mutilations.
Yeah, that's true.
And such people definitely lived in the poor area of Whitechapel.
I don't think he was a doctor just from the vibe you get from the first thing where he ends it with saying OPS. They're starting to say, it says something like they're saying I'm a doctor now.
Yeah, he does just mock them.
Yeah. So, obviously the precision of what he's doing is, I don't know. Like we discussed this in the first part.
Stu seemed to fall on the fact that he had anatomical knowledge.
Yeah, but not necessarily practice, but then he's put that theory into practice, which is it very clear on the precision?
It's not particularly precise, because the cuts are frequently described as jagged and stuff like that.
I mean, you could always argue that they did it in haste because they wanted to get the job done quick or whatever.
Perhaps he was shaken as well.
Yeah.
True, yeah. Although I feel like if you're thinking more of it being like a butcher is somebody... Okay, admittedly, they're not cutting human. Well, I hope they're not cutting humans most of the time. But I feel like a butcher would be somebody who'd be able to do quite a clean incision.
Yeah. It's whether the anatomy transfers from animal carcasses to humans. Because things like organs and stuff and bones are in different areas.
Yeah, that's true.
But also, I mean, I'm not a doctor. I've never done surgery, but I know where like the womb is.
I mean, I probably know less. Like, I know the general area, but like, if I had to point to it in like...
If you were to imagine yourself playing Operation, and I said to you, on the person's body, where would their spleen be?
Oh, I have no idea.
It'd be very unlikely that you'd be able to say it's there.
That doesn't exist. It's like the appendix. It's not a thing.
Your appendix exists as well.
It's like Australia. It doesn't exist.
Is that the next episode? Okay, so the police followed this train of thought in terms of the killer being a butcher, and so they investigated local butchers and slaughterers. A report to the Home Office confirms that 76 butchers and slaughterers were visited, and that the inquiry encompassed all of their employees for the previous 6 months. However, nothing came of this. So they quickly ruled out butchers and slaughterers, like local ones, I guess, from their report. After doing, as I said before, they did quite a lot of work. I mean, 67 butchers.
Yeah, it's a good attempt to try and cover the suspect pool, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I wrote down just at the end of the last part was, what if it was a member of the police?
Oh, the conspiracy.
Yeah. I don't know if any of obviously we've not actually gone into the suspects you've named or whatever. I don't know if any of them were officers or
no.
any part.
None of the ones that I've picked.
Yeah, so obviously, you can attribute it to not having fingerprints and stuff like that and lack of technology. But what if it was a cover-up? Obviously, you mentioned it, the member of the royal family. They covered that up. It's still possible that they could have done it for a police officer as well. They could,
but
which
again,
potentially was corrupt.
Going into theories like this, you have to then implicate the entire police force in the conspiracy. And it quickly becomes this massive conspiracy with no hard evidence to support it.
Okay.
And yeah, it's cool theory.
Which is convenient, do you think?
It is, yeah, it's very convenient. So, suspect 8, the entire Metropolitan Police.
Well, let's not explore it then, but that was the only thing I thought of.
That's reasonable. It's reasonable. Tell us about your suspect list then, Alex.
Okay. These are in no particular order. They're just the order I found them in, really. So the first one is called Montague John Druitt. He's considered by many to be the number one suspect in the case, because he was on the suspect list of Sir Melville Macnaghten, who was the assistant commissioner on the Met from 1903 to 1913. So this is quite a bit after the investigation. And the assistant commissioner at the time has come up with a list of suspects because I guess they can't let it go, even though it's, 20 years after. So Druitt was a barrister and an assistant master in a school at Blackheath. However, he'd been dismissed from the school prior to his death. The reason for this dismissal is unknown, but there is a rumour it was due to homosexual tendencies. Now, I couldn't find any hard evidence for that, but it's mentioned a lot when you research this person. So I'm not sure where it's come from, whether it's come from a family member being interviewed or whether just from friends and stuff like that. But yeah, there's a rumour he was gay. On Monday, December 31st, 1888, so this is about a month after Mary Kelly was killed, Druitt's body was found floating in the Thames.
Ooh.
He had committed suicide by placing 4 large stones in each pocket and drowning himself.
Oh gosh, what a way to go.
A suicide note was left for his brother, which read, "Since Friday, I felt I was going to be like a mother, and the best thing for me was to die." His mother had been institutionalised the previous July. So he had a fear that he was going insane.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And the fact that his suicide lines up right after the murders basically implicated him straight away.
Yeah. Sort of dobbed himself in it by jumping ship.
It did, yeah. It makes him seem guilty.
Yeah.
It was estimated that Druitt had been in the water for upwards of 3 weeks or more before being found.
Oof.
With the date of his dismissal being 30th of November, it seems likely that he died in early December, so the 1st or the 2nd. That's very quickly after Mary Kelly.
I thought Mary Kelly was the 6th of December, off the top of my head.
9th of November, it was. So
9th of November.
Just under a month.
Okay.
Yeah. This is quite an interesting character. Sorry, is there more?
There's a bit more, yeah.
Go on.
So we can assume he killed himself because of his dismissal, combined with his mental health issues, with either of these factors triggering the other. So perhaps the dismissal triggered the mental health issues, or the mental health issues came on and they fired him because of them. He was still a successful barrister, though, so perhaps he killed himself because of the guilt from killing so many people, if you assume he was Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
In terms of evidence for this guy, the only real hard evidence, well, not even hard evidence, was that he sort of somehow resembled the witness descriptions.
Yeah.
But again, the descriptions are pretty generic.
Pretty vague, yeah.
Yeah, just generic white man.
Macnaghten incorrectly believed that Druitt was a doctor, which also could have fit with the police's profile of Jack being an educated individual with anatomical knowledge. though he also had an alibi because he was playing cricket at 11:30am at Blackheath, which is on the other side of the Thames from Whitechapel, on the day of Chapman's murder. So therefore he wouldn't have had time to kill Chapman, take the train back to Blackheath, and get ready for the match in time. Now, I looked it up, and it's about a 40-minute car ride nowadays. So maybe 2 hours on a train in the Victorian times?
If he managed to get, I'm guessing they weren't as frequent as they are now.
Yeah, you could assume
Unless
that.
he travelled on horse or something instead.
Maybe.
Or if he knew the train times, which would make sense, and then he timed the murder so that he would be able to get the train straight after.
Yeah. These are, because this statement puzzled me a bit, so I did a little bit of research into whether the timings lined up. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of possible that he could have killed Chapman and then got back in time for the match, but he probably would have been cutting it very close. Because again, he probably would have had to get dressed and maybe wash off the blood and stuff like that.
That's true, yeah.
So, you said before, one thing I noticed, that you said that the police report said he was incorrectly identified as a doctor.
Well, the report wasn't... The report said he was a doctor, but that's incorrect.
Yeah, we know it's incorrect, but it does say right at the top of the page on the website we were discussing in the last part. Druitt was the second son of a medical practitioner.
Yeah, he was a son of a doctor.
So his dad was.
But he himself wasn't. He was a barrister and a teacher.
I think that's quite an interesting point, though, because
it's still interesting, yeah.
Yeah, because
to know if he's grown up with it.
Yeah, I was going to say, if he's grown up either perhaps witnessing his dad do surgery the reason I mentioned surgery there, so on the website that we're referring to, it lists him as FRCS, not practicing. FRCS stands for Fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons.
Ah, okay.
So he clearly has his dad he clearly had a surgical background because, he was part of a college of surgeons. So whether or not he's grown up seeing either anatomical textbook or he's grown up seeing surgery practice and then thought, I'll have a go at it, or it's become the embodiment of him acting out through his dad.
Yep, these are all things that are likely.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it hangs on the fact that whether you believe he had a surgical background, whether it was required for the murders itself.
True. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's more than likely. Even just growing up in that aspect, I know parts about my dad's profession, even though I've never worked in that area.
Yeah.
So
this character he ticks a lot of the boxes, doesn't he? So we spoke before. So he's got the kind of typical appearance of Jack the Ripper. We spoke about the fact that we thought Jack the Ripper might have money. He's come from a very affluent background.
Definitely.
Montague, John Druitt. He is very well educated, so it suggests that he'd probably be able to write. He's certainly ticking the checklist off, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
All he's got to be is left-handed, and it's 100% him.
He was noted to have had formidable strength in his arms and wrists.
Ah, okay.
Despite his gaunt appearance in surviving photographs. That's related to him playing cricket, like you mentioned before. But it's still, makes him more likely to be able to overpower someone.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that is an added dimension to this suspect is the whole... So his mum was sectioned into an asylum. It does refer to July 1888. His mother, Anne, succumbed to mental illness and was confined to Brook Asylum in Clapton.
Yeah.
She'd have been... Clapton in London would have fit the profile of him potentially being local. Maybe
he lived in Blackheath, so...
I'm not sure where that is.
It's about 40 minutes nowadays from Whitechapel in the car. It's south of Whitechapel, over the Thames.
Okay, fine.
So he was sort of local, but he probably would have had to take a train in.
Yeah.
Two things as well. One, it's quite interesting that his mum was sectioned.
Yeah.
Because there's obviously an argument with psychology and whatever that can be passed on genetically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, in the same vein, the second point I was going to make was, what if he thought that? And again, with obviously medicine and psychology has advanced a lot more, way more since then. So what if, he believed his mother had this illness and then he believed he would have it, so he killed himself?
Yeah, destined to have it.
But if you don't link this guy at all to the Whitechapel killings, then it's quite likely that it's a suicide based on the fact he just lost his job, which seemed quite important to him, and the issue of perhaps mental illness happening at the time, or the fear that mental illness was going to creep up on him. And obviously mental illness at this time was
very taboo. But still
very
is,
taboo, yeah.
But I also, in the same vein again, I think I mentioned it in the first part, one of the traits of a psychopath is feigning insanity.
Yeah.
So maybe, obviously, killed himself, but what if it was an accident?
There's no accident where you put 4 large stones in your pockets.
Well, no,
jump
but
into the
there's
Thames.
no
Could he have been
accident
dead
when
before he was dumped?
Right.
The autopsy doesn't have any... From what I believe, there was no like stabs or strangulation or anything like that. It was
just purely from drowning,
right.
But also, I know it doesn't... It's a bit of a stretch, I know, but in prison, for example, some of the suicides are accidental, and it's someone trying to, attention-seeking, cry for help, whatever. They've done it to maybe prove a point, and they've accidentally ended up killing themselves. Obviously some people cut their wrists or whatever. They think they're going to get the medical attention straight away, and then they don't.
Yeah.
It's sometimes like that. So, what if this guy had someone that he knew would be checking on him, for example, and then he tried to kill himself, and then no one actually came to check on him?
Okay, we'll move on to 2 then. So, Montague John Druitt, pretty likely. But how about number 2? I think my favourite suspect, not in terms of likeliness, in terms of story. So this is a hard name to pronounce, so I'm going to try my best. Severin Klosowski?
Severus Snape.
Severus Snape. No,
Say it again?
Severus... Is it a W or... I assume it's a
No,
V.
Oh, I
yeah,
can
so
see.
it's-
It's Severin Klosowski.
Yeah, so Severin Antonievich Klosowski, or George Chapman.
A.K.A. George Chapman, a.k.a. Massive Scumbag.
With a
So this guy was
mustache.
as most people did back then. This guy was the primary suspect of Frederick Aberline, who was chief inspector for the Met during the Whitechapel murder investigation. So this is like right at the time of the killings. He was a Polish immigrant who arrived in London shortly before the murders began, which implicates him.
Yeah.
He qualified as a junior surgeon in Poland, but he worked as a barber while he lived in London.
Plot thickens.
For some reason, he went from a surgeon to a barber after he moved, which I don't understand why, but I guess he couldn't find a surgery job and he settled for barber. In October 1889, he married Lucy Badersky, whom he had met 5 weeks previously, despite still being married to his first wife, who he had left in Poland. So, wife 1 finds out and moves to London, where I guess the 3 of them awkwardly lived together until wife 1 gave up and then left, once Chapman's son is born. So I'm going to call this guy Chapman, just to make it simple.
Yeah.
The baby then dies of pneumonia, because that's what happened in the 1800s, and the couple then emigrate to New Jersey. So we're now in the US of A. He's working as a barber in New Jersey, and the couple are fighting a lot, and during an argument he attacks Lucy with a knife, claiming he was going to cut her head off before pointing to the part of the room where he was going to bury her. Lucy is terrified, and she returns back to London. He then follows her, but they break up a bit after getting back together in London. Okay, so in 1883, Chapman started living with a woman called Annie Chapman, which is not the same one as the murder victim.
Oh, okay. I was
Just
going
have
to
to make a
say.
distinction. Because that would be damning evidence.
Yeah.
They were together for around a year until he started another awkward roommate situation with another woman, and Annie leaves. It's at this point that he starts to use the identity of George Chapman, because I guess the women of the world were aware of his scumbagginess. In 1895, he starts living with a woman called Mary Spink. They're together a few years, but of course he's beating her the whole time. Spink died of consumption on Christmas 1897, and correct me if I'm wrong, Stu, but consumption basically means that the doctors don't really know what killed them, but
Well,
it was
it's
stomach-related.
tuberculosis, actually.
Right, okay.
So tuberculosis used to be so physically draining on your body, it effectively consumed you. Hence the consumption name.
Okay, so the death definitely wasn't tuberculosis, so the consumption cause of death is very wrong then. Because it turns out the previous April, Chapman had purchased 1 ounce dose of tartar anemic, which is essentially an odourless and almost tasteless poison, and he'd been gradually poisoning the woman for months. And I bet you can't guess what happened to his next 2 wives.
Well,
He also used the same dose of tartarinemic and slowly poisoned them because he didn't like them.
why is he married to them then?
I
Has
don't
this man
know.
never heard of divorce?
This
Maybe
guy's
it's
a-
the alimony.
some
Fear of
massive
paying out
scumbag.
alimony.
So he was found out after they detected the poison during the post-mortem of his 3rd wife, following which they exhumed the bodies of the other 2 wives, which had been preserved remarkably due to the poison, and found similar traces in their bodies.
Ah.
He was charged with the 3 murders, but was only convicted of the death of his 3rd wife in March 20, 1903. The jury only took 11 minutes to come to a decision of guilty. He was hanged on April 7th, 1903. So, yeah, this is a terrible person. That's an understatement. He's the worst. And he got killed because of it. They hung him.
Yeah.
So, why is Chapman likely to be Jack? All the timings lined up. He arrived at London shortly before the murders began, and they stopped after he moved to America. He had knowledge of anatomy, based on the previous surgery work he did in Poland. He claimed he was going to kill his first wife with a knife, and he was a convicted serial killer. The only issue with Chapman being a suspect is the change in killing style between his wives and the canonical 5.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
That's what I was going to say.
So we were talking before.
The knife attacks are particularly barbaric. They're particularly brutal. They're particularly masculine. These are more feminine. They're subtle poisonings, aren't they?
They are.
It's not. They're just the MO just seems completely different.
Yeah, it doesn't seem right. The whole point of a serial killer is my theory with the 5. Something must have happened for it to stop. Either
presumably
with
the guy
suicide.
died.
Yeah, or because why would he have stopped? Like the idea of it being a serial killer means that he would have just carried on until he got stopped.
Mm-hmm.
So why would this guy settle down, admittedly kill his wives, but get married a couple of times? It doesn't fit the same thing. But
That's
also, as a separate thing as well, you mentioned he was a barber.
Yeah.
So I was trying to find flaws in that. It makes sense that he would have come to the country and not being able to get a job in his field.
Yeah,
So
because he was
resorted to
an immigrant, and it was a bit taboo to be an immigrant at the time.
We mentioned before about the killings being around the weekends.
Mm-hmm.
Would it make sense that a barber would work more on the weekends? Because that's when people aren't working.
Perhaps, but he owned his own hairdressing salon.
Oh, so he didn't necessarily work.
He was in charge of when it was open and closed.
Okay.
Maybe the traditional phrase "something for the weekend, sir" referred to brutally slaughtering someone.
Perhaps, yeah. He
Rather than
coined the
Johnny.
phrase.
He did coin the phrase.
People started to notice, and that's why he moved to America.
Yeah.
And he changed his name. Yeah, so this guy's a complete scumbag.
He's just a dick, isn't
He
he?
is, yeah.
So there are bits of it that fit. So he moved there and the killing started. Kind of coincidence, is it not? He moved away, the killing stopped. Is it coincidence? Is it not?
Yeah.
But
He did
but
then
the
move back
the
afterwards.
Pattern, when he moved back, the killings didn't resume. They took on a very, very different form, didn't they?
They did, yeah.
For me, this one doesn't fit.
You could think of it in the fact that the canonical 5 were prostitutes, and perhaps he didn't like prostitutes, whereas his wives weren't. I presume they were unemployed, and he was... Or maybe they helped in the barbershop, or something like that.
Yeah,
I didn't look too much into their occupations, but... and maybe he thought there was a more fitting way to die, which was maybe more humane in his opinion, even though it definitely wasn't. It was prolonged over months.
Yeah, suffering.
It was horrible. So, less likely in your opinion?
I don't like Suspect 2.
I don't like him either, he's a scumbag.
No. But I also don't think...
He's not invited to... He's not on my Christmas card list, anyway.
No. Okay, so I'll move on to Suspect number 3, which we've theorised about previously. Sean brought it up. This is the Jill the Ripper theory.
Ah.
The reason that Jack the Ripper was never caught was because everyone was looking for the wrong person. They should have been looking for a woman. Most likely a midwife. This makes sense because a midwife would blend in.
Yeah.
They could move around at night in bloodstained clothing without arousing suspicion, and they would have had the required anatomical knowledge for the mutilations. This theory is mostly based on the situation surrounding Mary Kelly's death. Caroline Maxwell, who lived near Mary Kelly, claims to have seen her at 8 a.m, supposedly 4 hours after her death. She based the sighting on the fact that the woman she saw was wearing clothing that she knew Kelly owned. The police had no reason to distrust this witness, and so investigated the possibility that the killer had dressed up in Kelly's clothes in order to disguise herself, therefore accounting for Mrs. Maxwell's sighting. Another reason that the killer being a midwife makes sense is that Kelly was 3 months pregnant at the time of her death.
Ooh.
There's no way that Kelly could have afforded to raise a baby, so she would have contacted the midwife to terminate the pregnancy, which she would have done in the privacy of her own home.
It would have made sense as well, because then if she did have a vendetta against prostitutes, she would have known exactly who everyone was for that reason.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the theory is that the killer was called in to abort the baby. Kelly stripped and folded her clothes on a nearby chair, which was present in the scene, and was then killed by the midwife. After this, the killer burned her blood-soaked clothing in the fireplace, which there was also evidence of. The fireplace had been lit, and escaped wearing Kelly's clothing. So that's the whole Jill the Ripper theory. I think that one's quite interesting.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
The things I really like about that are it explains the Mary Kelly scene, doesn't it? It explains why her clothes are folded up. It explains why she would have not, the door wasn't tampered with, because she would have let a midwife in.
Yeah.
It explains
and
the
potentially
position of Mary Kelly as well, because she was laid prone on the bed, wasn't she? With in effectively the position of having one's genitals examined.
Yeah, but all these things
flat, wasn't she?
Also line up with the position and the situation you take if you were inviting a man into your place to engage in paid sex work.
True.
Because you'd also take your clothes off and fold them by the bed. And she was also wearing a nightgown sort of thing in her death.
But was that just to allow so she could pull it up?
Perhaps.
Because it makes sense to me as well, because what if, again, it might be a stretch, but like, would you give a midwife a key? She might not have been pregnant at the time or whatever, but in cases of emergencies, would your dedicated midwife or whatever have a key to your house?
I don't think so. I don't think that's...
Not sure.
I don't think that's a reasonable thing to do.
Well, no.
Again, there's no specific rush with terminated pregnancy. I mean, you've got months to do it, right? Because she was 3 months pregnant. Like, we're not talking, like, hours of rush. This is weeks and weeks.
No, we aren't talking hours, that's true.
Yeah. So it's something you could arrange.
Not in the middle of the night.
Well, I think you'd arrange it for the middle of the night to not arouse suspicion, because there'd be gossip and stuff going on.
And I suppose as well, if in that profession you wouldn't want people to know that you're pregnant.
Yeah, because you'd lose money. Because I mean, some people are into that, but the majority aren't.
The thing that I don't like about this theory is that we made reference to a midwife having surgical anatomy, but midwives don't routinely do surgery. So whilst I understand they would know anatomically where the womb is, the Mary Kelly murder was brutal. She had her heart removed from her chest, if you remember.
Yep.
Yeah.
They went in through the base of the right lung and pulled her heart out of her mediastinum.
I was going to say they didn't snap the rib cage open or anything. It was just
they went in through the bottom of the right lung.
Oh,
I think I remember reading.
I don't know if that's
sure. Well, but it just like what if you're a midwife? Like, okay, I get why the organs would have been removed from the abdomen, because if you're trying to get a babe, like if you're thinking about this being a fetus, you're going to try and take the fetus out with the womb, especially if you've got some sort of twisted fantasy about that or revenge plot against this lady for whatever reason. Like, you might remove her womb. It would explain why the other people's wombs were removed, because it's all tying in with female anatomy and a midwife understanding female anatomy and being perhaps all of these people had been pregnant. Like, it's possible to say, but
the others were a lot more public though.
Yeah. But it just doesn't seem to, like, why would a midwife cut someone's heart out and remove their, like, ritually cut their eyelids and things like that, like the Mary Kelly murder? Because that was absolutely savage, wasn't it?
Well, like we've discussed in the last part, what if she just had more time this time?
Yeah, the killer definitely had more time in this situation.
Because it wasn't public, so what if she wanted to do that from the start?
Perhaps, yeah.
What also doesn't make sense is, I'm thinking now, is the letters.
Yeah, the letters,
where it's
definitely,
Jack the Ripper.
They definitely damn the fact that the killer would have been a woman. If you can assume these letters are legitimate.
Oh, that's interesting. I just realised as well, would, at this time, if she's a midwife, it suggests she's educated as well, right?
I don't necessarily think that.
I'm not sure. The problem is I've never watched anything like Call the Midwife, but I know that those sorts of programs cover a similar time period, don't they?
No, it's...
Oh, is it?
To my knowledge, it's a lot more modern. Like,
oh, okay, right. Okay, scrap that idea then. But the thing is, in terms of it, a midwife laughing about it, like the end of the letter, to be fair, just say, and I've heard they say I'm a doctor now. It could be like the ironic, I'm not a doctor, I'm a midwife, perhaps suggesting that she's proud of her profession and this has that, again, the egotistical side of it.
Perhaps, yeah.
Oh, Call the Midwife is 1950s. Just looked it up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, fine. So a lot later. That's my mistake. I've never seen it, to be fair. I did say that. No. But I don't know. I think midwives would probably have had some sort of training, but perhaps it would have been less organized training and perhaps more like their mother was a midwife and they've become a midwife. And it might be something that is somebody who's delivered lots of babies, then calls themselves a midwife and arguably isn't an expert in it.
One thing it says right at the bottom is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. He theorized that Jack the Ripper disguised himself as a woman in order to capture and become more readily accessible to women. What if it's the other way around?
What a woman faking to be a man?
Which would make perfect sense.
Yeah.
To try and hide it.
It would explain the height. It would explain... But they were quite stocky, so it'd have to be a pretty well-built woman, unless she was padding herself out to hide her breasts and things like that, to make it look more manly.
All the killings that we can determine anyway involved alcohol. So what if they were just too drunk to respond? And especially when it comes to, like, the savage throat-cutting thing, that would be quite debilitating, I would have thought. If she did it after gaining the trust of this person, especially if she's a midwife, like you said, it would have been quite easy, I guess, just to sneak up behind someone.
Mm.
But, again, it goes back to, obviously, the whole psychopathy and serial killer, like, characteristics makeup. It's just a general thing. There obviously are going to be outliers, but it doesn't really fit the theme of the female killers, because you're right in what you said, basically, about the majority being through poison. That's why it's kind of hard to really determine whether it should or shouldn't be a woman on the grounds of the stereotypical female serial killer.
And another thing which ruins this theory is almost all of the eyewitness testimony say that the victim was seen previously, like prior to death, with another man.
But that could just be part of the profession. It would make sense that it was with a man.
It could, but the man would have to quickly... The man would have to quickly leave the situation and then the midwife to come in and then kill them.
Which is possible. I mean, we're talking about someone just being seen on the street with someone or whatever. Because, like, the first one was down an alley or something, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
It was, so yeah, it could have literally been, they were talking, they split up, went different ways. She saw the midwife on the street, who potentially had already been tailing her anyway, if it was premeditated, which it probably is by, the pattern. It makes sense that she would have been building up to this, and because of the whole idea of the serial killer, they have motives, they have a plan. So it makes sense that as soon as they broke up, it would have been perfect timing. Right, seen with a bloke, now I can kill her. Just to discount what you're saying, because I really do. I'm quite all in on the theory.
You like this one?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense because no one would have expected it to be a woman at the time.
Yeah, it's a fair point. For me, it just doesn't quite. I don't think that.
I agree, it's not flawless.
No.
None of these are flawless.
I think that the difference between probably me and you there, Sean, is that you're more drawn to this theory anyway. You had a kind of preconceived idea where you were thinking about this anyway. And for me, I can't get past the breaking point of the intricacy of the mutilation from the fifth murder with the sort of total anatomical dissection. For me, that just doesn't seem to fit the role of a typical female killer, let alone one who would have had less surgical knowledge than perhaps a surgeon or a doctor by background, or a butcher.
We're using words like, the typical female serial killer and stuff like that.
Yeah, true. I guess this isn't a typical serial killer because we don't know who it is.
Yeah.
It might be the fact that the trend is bucked so much that is what's throwing us off.
Especially when this was considered the first serial killing.
True, yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Suspect
number 4. Suspect number 4. We'll stay with Mary Kelly for a bit. How about her ex-lover?
Ooh.
So, Joseph Barnett was a fish porter who was living with Mary Kelly at 13 Miller's Court while the murders were taking place. They lived together until the end of October, when Barnett moved out over an argument. It seems that Kelly was allowing a prostitute to share their lodgings. Barnett disapproved of Kelly's prostitution, which she had gone back to a few months prior, after Barnett had lost his job. So, while he's a fish porter, he's basically paying for the two of them, and then he loses his job, and she's then forced to go back to prostitution in order to pay the bills.
Mm-hmm.
For the next week, Barnett visited Kelly often. He gave her money and appeared to be on good terms with her. However, it's at the end of the week that Kelly is found murdered in the flat. Barnett was interviewed by detectives for 4 hours over Kelly's murder. However, due to lack of evidence, he was ruled out as a suspect. In terms of links between Barnett and the Ripper, he matches the description provided by witnesses very well, and he was one of the people who could have locked the door after leaving the murder scene, assuming he had a key, which he probably did. The reason that Barnett's considered to be a likely suspect is that he was a subject of a 1995 book called Jack the Ripper, The Simple Truth, written by Bruce Paley.
Mm-hmm.
The book suggests that in an attempt to dissuade Kelly from prostitution, Barnett murdered a number of prostitutes around Whitechapel. His plan didn't succeed, however, and he ended up killing her in a love-scorn frenzy, which is quite a grandiose theory. It's quite unlikely in my opinion, but in terms of this suspect, it's likely that he killed Mary Kelly, but it's hard to trace it to the other four.
Yeah.
So, what do you reckon, Sean?
It makes sense, but I'm still not getting his motive for the first murders.
Yeah, the issue with the other four is definitely telling, but in terms of just killing Mary Kelly, it seems quite likely.
I mean, it could be that he alone killed Mary Kelly and the other four were completely,
Yeah, and that's what I kind of lean towards if you think Joseph Barnett is a likely suspect in any of these murders. Because again, there's no hard evidence that all 5 of the canonical victims are from the same serial killer.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, it makes sense. So, this whole thing, basically I'm trying to find reasons to believe that he would have a motive for killing the first 4.
The motive for killing the first 4 is a Scooby-Doo villain plot, where they attempt to dissuade people from investigating the killings, sort of thing, right. Where he's establishing a scary serial killer based around prostitution to stop his lover from becoming what he hates most.
Yeah, because obviously if you're gonna try and intimidate somebody out of a profession, you're gonna do something to the profession, aren't you?
Yeah,
target the profession.
I don't believe this is the guy, but that's enough for me to to understand why he's considered a suspect.
A suspect, yeah.
It would make sense. But I think it's a bit of a stretch if there's no proof of that. But I don't know why he would be visiting her often, giving her money to support her just to kill her off in such a brutal way.
But presumably he regrets his decision and he wants to get back together with her. And then at the end of the week, she maybe turns him down, finally, and then he goes into a rage and kills her.
Mm-hmm. Which would make sense with, being allowed in her room and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was no struggle in terms of the door or anything, was there? So
no, there wasn't. And the door was locked on the way out as well.
Obviously, in terms of the mutilation side of it, it mentions he used to be a fishmonger.
Yeah, but that's a bit of a stretch.
Fish porter. Yeah, it is a bit of a stretch, but...
It's the skill with a knife, though, I think they're implying there, isn't it?
Yeah, rather than the anatomical knowledge.
Yeah, I'm not sure fish...
Don't forget as well...
have many wounds.
If he's used to gutting fish, because we haven't really gone into the aspect of who would have literally the bollocks to do it. Because, just cutting someone open isn't going to be a nice thing to do, is it? It would probably stink. It'd make you vomit if you're obviously, if you're a surgeon or whatever, you'd practice. But even then, it's not.
It's pretty stomach wrenching the first time you do it.
If you're performing an operation on someone or witnessing an operation, you might find it interesting. But actually, butchering someone or cutting a fish open, the first time you do it, what I'm trying to say is that the suspect should have some kind of background in gutting or surgery or a medical background or butchering or whatever to be able to physically carry out the acts as they're happening.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on from Joseph Barnett, My fifth suspect is William Henry Burry, or Burry. I think it's Burry. He was a resident of London near Whitechapel during the times of the murders. Shortly after moving to London, he got married to a former prostitute called Ellen Elliot. He was described by his boss as a violent drunk. He continually beat Ellen throughout their marriage and was once caught kneeling on her, threatening to cut her throat with a knife. In January 1889, the couple moved to Dundee because Burry had found a new job. So if you're not familiar with UK geography, Dundee is in Scotland, and it's pretty much the other end of the country from London. It's quite a ways, like it's a whole day's drive maybe nowadays.
Yeah.
Something like that.
From London, definitely. It'll be like 8+ hours.
Yeah, it'd be ridiculous.
Easily.
So they moved to Dundee. He's found a new job. A month after the move, Ellen's suicide was reported to Dundee police station by Burry himself. Right, this is hilarious now.
Suicide?
Yeah, so Ellen's committed suicide, and Burry's gone to the police station to report this. He claims to have woken the next day after drinking, only to find his wife on the floor with a rope around her neck. Rather than seek out a doctor for help, Burry told the detective that he instead cut the body and hid it in a trunk where she'd been for 6 days.
What?
Burry confessed to feeling guilty about his intent to conceal the body and expressed fear that he may be arrested as Jack the Ripper. The idiot was immediately detained on suspicion of murder. So that is hilarious.
What?
That makes no sense.
So that's literally the only reason.
Oh no, I might be Jack the Ripper. What happens if I've suddenly killed 5 other people?
His reason that he was...
I'd hate for people to believe that.
His reason that he was guilty about concealing the body. That's the reason he told the police. He thought that was going to work.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that one.
It's not done yet. There's more.
No.
It continues. So they interrogate him for a bit, and then they investigate his flat. They reveal where Ellen's body is stuffed in the trunk, which he told them the location in the interrogation. They also found the length of rope Burry had used to strangle Ellen, complete with strands of her hair, as well as a large penknife caked with blood and bits of human flesh.
Oh gosh. She definitely did that to herself, didn't she?
Yeah, well, he did say he cut her body up after she committed suicide.
That's true. Nice.
So it all checks out so far. Bloodstained clothing was also found, in addition to some of Ellen's personal effects, which had been burned in the fireplace. Chalk graffiti reading Jack the Ripper is at the back of this door, and Jack the Ripper is in this cellar were found on the back door of Burry's flat, as well as in the stairwell leading up from the back of the property. Now, there's some debate about what this graffiti is, and the newspapers at the time attributed it to vandalism by local youths. But it's not hard to say that he might have wrote it himself, because he's actually insane.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Has he got a bit of an imitation kind of complex about it? So presumably he strangled her to death and then been stabbing her and cutting her up.
Yeah. But
it's not the clean surgical dissection that happened with some of the other Jack the Ripper ones.
I mean,
so
you can't really say they were clean surgical.
No, that's true. But this is with a penknife, isn't it?
Yeah. A large penknife.
A large penknife.
The other ones just said a long-bladed knife. So there's some debate on what kind of knife it would be.
Yeah. One thing I want to point out that I find quite funny is this is the website, not the scenario. It's got a voting system for who you think is the most likely suspect. It's like, vote now. Who's your favourite suspect? So, yeah, I found that quite funny.
So I'll continue because I'm not done.
What?
Examination of... And it continues. Examination of the body showed that Ellen had been strangled from behind. She committed suicide by strangling herself from behind.
Yeah.
Her right leg was broken in 2 places so it could be crammed into the crate. Incisions by the penknife ran downwards along her abdomen and had been made within at most 10 minutes of the time of death. Tried and convicted, he was sentenced to death by hanging. Shortly before his execution, Burry confessed that he had killed his wife. Obviously. The press had a field day with the suspect because everything seemed to fit into place. However, despite investigating the matter, the Met found no substantial evidence and didn't consider him to be a viable suspect of being Jack the Ripper.
But
I think this guy's quite likely. I mean, he did move away to Scotland, and all this investigation...
Makes sense that he'd get out of it.
all this investigation was done by Scottish police, presumably, although the Met did get involved after the fact when they assumed he might have been a Jack the Ripper suspect. And I think they travelled up to Dundee themselves in a small team and did some research, but they discounted him.
So he moved to Scotland when? Sorry.
January 1889.
Yeah.
And when was the last?
Like a month, 2 months after.
2 months
November
after.
9th, 1888. Mary
So
Kelly
it
was
would make
killed.
sense. But
Sorry.
what I was trying to say before as well, what would have changed? What would have changed his pattern
Yeah, because
to make him move, to stop
especially
him?
because the Mary Kelly murder was so gruesome. He's then reverted, making the assumption that the Mary Kelly murder is done by the same killer. That was so totally barbaric. It's like he's from kill 1 to kill 5. There's been improvements in skill, effectively, in terms of the ability to kill, the ability to
Or just more time.
or more
like
time,
discussed.
yeah. But then there's no suggestion that he was interrupted during this killing either. So why would he suddenly just cram her into a trunk and not leave her in a public place to be found, or not dissect her properly? He just says she got deep stabs in the abdomen. But the 4th and 5th murders, the intestines were removed from the body and placed over the right shoulder or whatever it was. And then the Mary Kelly murder was gruesome, ritualized placing of bowel between the legs and the liver at the right-hand side, or whatever it was that they said. Like this, it just doesn't seem to fit either an escalating pattern of gruesome violence, or the Mary Kelly murder is the one that bucks the trend, and in fact, actually, it's just a continuation of the violence from the first 4.
Perhaps
It's
he got
hard
it
to-
out of his system. Perhaps Mary Kelly was like, right, I've done enough. I got the heart. I wanted the heart all along. I finally got the heart. And
I don't know if serial killers work that way.
I mean, you can't apply general logic to serial killers. Maybe he had like
No, but you can apply general knowledge of serial killers to serial killers. And the whole idea is that they just keep going until they get caught.
maybe he really liked the number 5, and he was like, right, at 5, I'm gonna get it all done. I'm gonna do like this whole ritual I've drawn out on this piece of paper and then burnt, obviously because there's no evidence of it. And he finally got his whole ritual done. He summoned Cthulhu and the giant squid, who then went to the sea and took over the Mary Celeste,
Okay.
which is slightly before this, I think. I can't quite remember the dates. But
Yeah, it's just before.
but yeah, and then he retired to Scotland, where he found a new job, and then he had one argument with his wife, just one, and then he snapped, and then he killed her. And then the guilt
Again.
built up after 6 days, and he turned himself in by saying she committed suicide, and he thought it would work because he's an
So,
idiot.
was he with his wife before he moved to Scotland?
Yes, shortly after moving to London, he got married to a foreign prostitute called Ellen Elliot
Where were they living?
in Whitechapel, I
They
believe.
were living in... Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting then.
I believe. Citation needed. I didn't write it down.
I don't know. The more we go on about this guy, the more it does kind of...
He's such an idiot,
Yeah.
this guy. It's
know.
amazing.
He is just a
Which
bit of a moron,
that doesn't
isn't he?
make sense. It doesn't make sense if he's that thick. No. But the more I think about it,
You're
no.
talking yourself out of it.
Yeah, if he's that thick to do something like that, there's no way he'd be able to hide through the first 5 murders, and potentially more, and not get caught.
It just doesn't fit. to
Okay,
me.
so final suspect. This is a fairly recent one. This is the one in the 90s that I mentioned before.
Okay.
So in 1992, a guy called Michael Barrett published a 64-page diary which was written by a cotton merchant from Liverpool called James Maybrick. Maybrick was born in 1838 and he died in 1889. After his death, his wife Florence was arrested and charged with murdering him by poisoning him with arsenic. Yep, he got Chapman. Bit of a slow joke there.
You're good at that.
The diary makes a claim that the author had seen his wife with her lover in the Whitechapel district of Liverpool, and instead of going after his lover, his subsequent rage had set him on a murderous rampage where he had killed and mutilated 5 prostitutes. This is me about embellishing it now, right? In fact, he was so angry he got lost and ended up in Whitechapel in London instead of Liverpool, or perhaps he just associated all Whitechapel with killing sprees.
Obviously.
God, he just hates Whitechapel. London, Liverpool, doesn't matter. He's just going to kill prostitutes. The diary describes each of the murders in detail before ending with the line, "I give my name that all know of me, so history do tell what love can do a gentleman born. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper.
So when did this diary come to light?
It was published in 1992.
So where was it from?
It was
who's found it? Has it been?
I think he found it in his house. He lived in like a manor house or something like that, or he inherited in Liverpool. It was because James Maybrick lived in Liverpool, so we have to assume that he would commute from Liverpool to London to the killings.
We know how long it takes.
It takes a while, yeah.
When I went to London and I drove straight there, it still took me about 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
It was about 7 hours because of traffic. Yeah, on a train, maybe, but were trains as fast as they are now?
No, they were much slower.
Exactly. Unless he moved down, he had a bit of annual leave, he thought, screw it, I'll go commit a few murders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's lots of issues with this. If you want, you can also look up the diary as well. I'm sure on Google Images there'll be pictures of it.
Yeah, I've just seen the pictures of it.
Does the handwriting fit? There's a question.
Yeah.
Ooh, wait, I want to see the handwriting.
Back to handwriting analysis. This is the topic we're best at. Is he left-handed? Just Google James Maybrick diary on Images and look for some pictures. It's probably on casebook.org somewhere, but it'll be in the citations probably at the bottom. But in terms of hard evidence for James Maybrick being a suspect, the confession in the diary is basically the only evidence for it. And as I mentioned before, the motive doesn't really make sense.
No, it doesn't really, does it?
Also, Michael Barrett isn't sure whether he forged the diary or not, because he keeps confessing to it being a forgery and then retracting his confession. Also, his wife has done that multiple times.
Right.
Yeah, so that's
it's a nice reliable source.
Yeah, it's very dubious. So another thing about this James Maybrick thing is that soon after the diary became public knowledge, a watch supposedly owned by James Maybrick surfaced. Mm-hmm. It was purchased by Albert Johnson in Liverpool in 1992, so the same year that the diary was published. Scratched on the inside of the watch are the initials of Jack the Ripper's 5 victims, the signature J. Maybrick, and also the words, I am Jack. So that's very on the nose.
Would Michael Barrett, the guy who found the diary, have any access to that watch?
Well, Barrett and this guy Albert Johnson both were in Liverpool, so it's not a stretch to say they might have known each other.
And be able to orchestrate it a bit, yeah.
It reeks of a conspiracy of, we want to sell this diary and make some money.
Conspiracy within a conspiracy.
Yeah.
It's just like a hoax, isn't it? Jumping on the...
because they definitely made money from selling this diary.
Yeah.
So in terms of more detail on the watch, it seems to date from the right time period. However, the maker appears to only have had a shop near Leeds, because there's a maker's mark on it. So the question is, why would the Maybricks, who are living in Liverpool, travel all that way to buy a watch?
Well, I mean, the watch could have literally just been made in Leeds, shipped to London, and then when he visited London, he bought the watch.
It was bought from Leeds.
Oh, it was bought from Leeds?
Because the maker only had that one shop in Leeds.
Yeah, but that one shop could have shipped it to other places. He could have literally just gone to Leeds.
Well,
it's possible he could have just gone to Leeds. Let's presume he's not Jack the Ripper. He could have just gone and bought
to
a
Leeds
watch
from Liverpool, specifically to buy a watch.
Well, no, he might have been on holiday if he's got money.
Maybe.
He could have just been there on business. He could have been anything. I mean, I've been to Manchester not for any specific reason every time I've gone, as such.
Yeah, but it's a lot easier to travel now than it would have been back then.
Yeah. But what was his job? What if he...
He was a cotton merchant.
So what if... Well, there you go. What if he was selling cotton in Leeds?
Maybe.
The thing that I'm not so sure on about this watch as well is that throughout our talks, at no point has it been insinuated that these were premeditated murders on specific individuals enough to know their names, to keep their initials engraved on a watch as memorabilia of a crime. That wasn't the point of it, was it?
No, but it definitely wasn't hard to know the names because it was all over the press after the killings took place.
Well, I don't know, it's like if he wanted to remember the victims, you'd take a token of something at the time.
He did.
So whether those are organs, aren't they?
Delicious organs.
Delicious, scrummy offal that he's taken.
Viscera. What a word.
Yeah, that he's taken at the time. If he wanted like a keepsake that would have their initials on it or something like that, you'd take things that would survive, wouldn't you? Like, rather than organs which would decay, you'd take physical things like necklaces, jewelry. I know these people aren't very rich, but
yeah, perhaps.
It seems strange. It seems a bit of a leap to say you've gone from being this person who's killed this random person that they've stumbled, or rather they've attracted down an alleyway, to suddenly keeping a keepsake of their identity, when their identity didn't seem to matter. It was just that they identified as prostitutes.
Yeah, it's a good point. And also the issue with the initials on the watch is that it lines up exactly with the canonical 5, and there are doubts about whether the 5 are from the same murderer.
Yeah, that's true.
That could go either way. It's a good
yeah.
point.
The argument, is it evidence that all 5 are linked, or is it evidence that somebody has linked all 5?
Someone thought that they were all 5 and then...
Yeah.
So in terms of dating the scratches, there's been some scientific tests done on the watch itself, but the results have been inconclusive, much like most of the scientific research that I mention on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So a study done by Bristol University estimated the scratches to be tens of years old, but they said that previous polishing might have affected their results. And they basically said that it could be tens of years old, but it could possibly also be hundreds of years old. We're not really sure. So yeah, great science done there.
That makes no sense. It's like, oh yeah, it's about 10 years old, that. Well, it could be about 100, give or take.
Yeah, there's this. There's a big time difference.
No, it was about a year or two ago. It's like, is it a year or 2 years? A year is a long time.
Yeah,
no, it's about 3 to 5 years. What?
So we can't say when the scratches were done at all, but we can say the watch was made in the right time period for the maker's mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's all I've got on the suspects. They're the 6 that I found, which I thought were quite interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I definitely leaned towards William Henry Burry before we talked about it a bit, but you two have kind of talked me out of it.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
The James Maybrick stuff it reeks of hoax to me. It fits in too perfectly.
It's interesting.
It is interesting, yeah.
It kind of makes sense that, later down the line, after new information comes to light and stuff, it would make sense that, the reason no one found it back then is because they didn't have this knowledge. But, it just reeks of a hoax, like you said.
Yeah, but I think that George Chapman is the most likely suspect for me. And again, the method of killing has changed, but there's so much damning evidence in terms of the timeline and the wife beating and the violent nature of the guy that it fits really well with him being this violent serial killer.
Yeah, but the method and the approach and the MO just doesn't fit with the original killings.
Yeah, but to argue that, I go with what I said before in terms of he hated prostitution, and that was a death befitting of prostitutes in his eyes. And because
just to clarify, this is George Chapman.
This is George Chapman, the Polish guy with the unpronounceable
name. Severin Klosowski.
Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe he had some pity for his wives, and although he did brutally kill them, he wanted to kill them in a more humane way in his eyes. But yeah, I'd go with Chapman of these 6 to be the most likely.
I guess that would make some kind of sense. The tendencies of serial killers, like characteristics, would be like they like feeling in control. So him having like this superiority in his head, it makes sense what you're saying, that he's done these things, he's done these murders, but then with his wives that he's potentially had some kind of care for. But I don't know. So
Stuart, who's your most likely suspect of the 6 I've presented?
So yeah, the caveat to this being that I actually wonder if it's none of them.
It could very well be none of them.
Yeah, of the 6 that you said, the first guy, Montague John Druitt, is the one that, I don't know if it's just because he seems so stereotypical of the killer, in that he looks like the killer, he behaves like the killer, he's got a family history of mental illness that makes him seem like he could well be somebody who was worried about being a psychopath or was having manifestations of psychopathy.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be leaning towards him. But I really like the Jill the Ripper theory. But yeah, if I had to get off the fence, I would say Montague John Druitt, the first suspect we discussed.
Yeah. The reason I don't lean towards Druitt is I kind of feel sorry for him. It's like it's a tragic story of a guy struggling with mental illness and losing his job, who then kills himself. In my opinion.
Yeah, I understand that. If he ends up being the killer, obviously we have no remorse. But,
yeah, of course, screw that guy.
But I do get that, yeah.
Right, so Sean, who do you reckon? Pick a person.
So I'll just quickly go through. So Druitt, I think he potentially is my most likely one, just the same as what Stuart said. I don't know. I think I'm torn.
Get off the fence. Get off the fence.
With one thing from like my degree knowledge is most serial killers or people who develop psychopathy or whatever tend to have had some kind of abuse in the past, emotionally, physically, or sexually, from a family member.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if his mum has always had a psychological illness.
Perhaps. That is something I missed out in my research, actually. I didn't go much into the childhood history of these suspects. I feel like I should have a bit.
Interesting. Yeah. And then Chapman, not sure because it doesn't really...
Oh, Chapman was definitely beaten as a child.
Right, okay.
Definitely.
Between Druitt and Chapman, I think Chapman's the most likely.
Ooh.
Maybe.
Have I swayed you?
I'll go back. Maybrick, I think it's a hoax. Burry, I think he's too thick. He obviously killed his wife
Burry's my favourite.
The year after, but I don't think it's him. Barnett, I'm not convinced of... although we did discuss his motive, the fact that he...
The Scooby-Doo plot.
The Scooby-Doo plot, yeah.
Scooby-Doo plot, yeah.
Turning his wife away from it. I get that. I don't agree with it. Actually, no. It makes sense that he would kill Mary Kelly, especially if he found out she was pregnant.
Yeah, he's a strong suspect for Mary Kelly specifically.
For just Mary Kelly, but I don't think he's the Ripper. Jill the Ripper, again, I'm biased because of my initial thought. It's probably between the first three. So Druitt, Chapman, and Jill.
You have to pick one.
So,
look, this is Ramblings of a Madman. We make hard statements here.
I was going to go with Jill.
Okay.
Just because it just kind of makes sense, but there's too many things like with the letter. She could have written it as a bloke, obviously, but everything about it just kind of leans towards it being male. Chapman, I think, is the most likely.
Yes, I've swayed you.
I do think he's... no, I don't know. No.
Come on! Get off the fence!
I'm going to go with Jill.
Going with Jill. Change his mind at the last second.
I was going to go with Chapman. It's literally just because it's the pattern. The pattern of the killings is just different.
Okay.
That's mine. I think it's Jill. And if anything, just because it's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
Being a female instead.
Yeah, that's why I like it as well.
Yeah.
Cool. So we've all picked someone different. And that's what's cool about this whole mystery, is that there's so many suspects that everyone has a favourite.
Yeah.
And there's perhaps hundreds more, which are just as likely as the ones we picked from, which you can look up in your own time. And maybe come back to us. Get in touch with us on Twitter at Rome Podcast. Tweet at us whoever you think is the most likely from the hundreds of suspects that you can find.
And most importantly, vote on the casebook.org website.
I want to see a spike on that website of voting.
Yeah, definitely. Thousands of listeners, obviously.
Thousands.
Clambering onto it'll crash the website.
It will, yeah. We'll have to warn them. Cool. So that was Jack the Ripper Part 2. We hope you enjoyed.
This is going to be released just before Christmas, so Merry Christmas, everyone.
Or just after Christmas, I'm not sure.
Or just after Christmas, he's not sure. But...
Happy Christmas / New Year / Hanukkah /
Depending on
Halloween.
when this is going to be released. Merry Christmas.
It will be released sometime in the future.
Yeah. Well, we recorded this in 1889, so...
yeah.
We're now time travelers.
Sean recorded it as he was brutally killing the victims.
I'm not even on the suspect list. Fuck that.
No, you're Jill the Ripper, mate.
Yeah. Perfect crime.
Perfect crime.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Ramblings with a Madman. If you enjoyed, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts and spread the word. Show your friends, show your mum, show your dog. Get in touch with us on Twitter at Rome Podcast. That's ROAM Podcast. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.